Welcome to the Great People Show, your guide to greatness, your GPS to excellence. Here's your host, J.J. White.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Great People Show. I am your host, J.J. White, and in the Great People Studio is our co-host, Mr. James Muncie. Good morning, James.
Good morning, JJ.
What's happening?
Oh, waiting for a call.
Waiting for a call?
I am.
Is it an important call?
You just keep on telling me that there's a calling.
There's a calling. There's a call coming. I'm gonna very, very quickly kind of switch the subject, and then we'll come back. Have you seen the new Star Wars trailer from last night?
I have.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
I'm actually a little surprised. I didn't know that you were into that.
Well, somebody shared it and I watched.
Okay.
So that's exciting.
What do you think?
I think it's going to be great.
I actually saw the Empire Strikes Back in the actual movie theater, which goes to show you how old I am.
Right.
And I have seen every movie in the theater ever since. And what I love about that particular movie, it is an example of what we have to do in our lives to fulfill our purpose in our calling, whether it be the rebellion calling of good or the negative calling of the Empire.
Yes, which that movie was pretty much all about.
I can do a couple good Hulk Hogan impersonations, but I can't do any Darth Vaders here this morning. So I was pretty excited when I saw that trailer out last night because it made me realize, or maybe think about what today's show is going to be about, which is our calling. And I'm really excited about the topic because I'm actually a little frustrated over the topic.
Why is that?
Most of the conversations I have with people on a daily basis has to do with their future,
right?
Their purpose, their why, their calling. And it is by far one of the most frustrating conversations that I have with people because most people have no idea what their calling is. They have no idea. They think they know, but they really do not know. And why do you think most people don't really know what their calling is?
Well, I'm guessing because they get it mixed up with their with their why.
You got up over this, man.
With their why, with their purpose. I think they get it mixed up.
Yeah.
I struggle with that difference.
Yeah.
What is that difference between my purpose and my calling? I know we're going to break that down on the show today. Why do you see that they don't know?
Well, you hit on one important subject. People get calling and purpose confused. And now you can add another element to this vernacular where people talk about what is my why.
Right.
Could be a lot of similarities there, but it's not the same. It's not the same. Before I get too far into this calling thing, let's talk about a little bit about what purpose is. Okay. We talked about this on the show last week. If you ask most people what their purpose is, especially if they're a parent, what are they going to say?
They're going to say my family, to raise a family, to raise kids.
My kids are my purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And if you ask them a similar question, what is your why? What are they going to say?
To raise a family.
To raise a family.
And to be a parent.
Especially if you have a newborn all the way up through, let's just say perhaps a kid not quite in college yet.
Right.
Because there is a certain point, especially there, where they kind of go off and you feel like, well, I've done that part. Now I just need to be here as a resource for them, well, financially.
Yeah.
But oftentimes a shoulder to lean on.
Right.
Or whatever. So then you ask them that question, what is your purpose? And people get really confused because what they thought was their purpose, or maybe what was their purpose, left them.
Right.
And went in starting to fulfill their own purposes now. But if you ask anybody, what is your calling? Those same people, what is your calling? You're going to get a lot of blank stares. It's a really complicated question. It's very thought-provoking, and it's deep.
It is. And I think that when it comes to having a calling, I think that most people want to have a calling. They want to have a calling in their life, but a lot of people don't feel like they have gotten it. A lot of people, I think that they never get it.
If you think of the word is calling, right? That someone's going to shout at you, hey, you, this is what you're supposed to go do. Now go do it. And we're waiting for that to happen. We're waiting to hear it from somewhere.
And it tends to have a lot of religious overtones, because
Yes.
you'll hear a lot of pastors and priests and people who are in that community say, well, I was called to do this. I've never gotten a call like that, JJ. I don't know about you.
My phone does not ring.
It
I've never had
hasn't.
God say, yo, what up?
And I would love nothing better than for that to happen.
Yeah.
But the truth is, it just hasn't.
It just doesn't. And so this was one of the initial questions I have whenever I was reviewing this and doing some research. You go on Google and you Google anything with the word, what is my calling? What is a calling? Whatever, however you want to put it. Every bit of it's faith-based.
Mm-hmm.
Like I went through several pages in the articles, the blog post, and we know Google is designed around what most other people are Googling.
Right.
So I think most people are looking for that faith-based answer. So here's my first question for you and our listeners, whether you're tuning into us on Facebook Live, you're listening to us on the radio right now, does God need to be involved in a calling?
I would say,
what if you're an atheist?
yeah, I mean, I would definitely say no.
Okay.
I would
So,
definitely say
yeah,
no.
I'm gonna wait for my answer on that.
All right.
Because I'm confused by it. If you are listening to us on the radio, we will be taking some callers later on in the show. You can reach us at 804-454-1366, 804-454-1366, because we're going to be asking a lot of questions on this show that our listeners are asking us.
Mm-hmm.
And they're asking mainly themselves, what is my calling? What if you don't believe in a higher power? How can you be called to something if you don't believe in God, or don't believe that there is a God, or don't believe that God actually does these kind of things?
I think that certain people can have natural abilities, whether they're called to be a professional athlete, whether they're called to be an engineer or a doctor. They're gifted with the ability to learn certain things that they feel like that they get their calling there, and it has nothing to do with religion.
Yeah, and I would love to hear from an atheist. I would love to have an atheist call the show, or at best an agnostic person, to help us understand what calling means to them if it's not faith-based.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is a stake that I'm going to go ahead and put in the ground right now, and I might get some pushback on this. We went to Facebook and all social media platforms Monday night and asked the question, do you have a calling? What is it? And there were several answers on there that were what I would call self-centered. Now, don't take that word bad yet.
Mm-hmm.
Self-centered just means that it's centered on you and it's not centered on someone else.
Right.
I find difficulty, I'm just going to straight out say it, I don't believe it's a calling if it's all about you.
Okay.
If people say my calling is to be a runner and run marathons, well, how does that translate to other people? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that as a calling. It might be a step in the process of your calling, because you need to build some mental fortitude, or go through some training, or go through some attitude development along the way. But please don't tell me that your entire time on earth is all centered around something just for you. It just doesn't stick for me. I just don't believe it. I'm sorry.
And so you saw a lot of comments about that.
I was
in that
surprised how
direction.
many were kind of about them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, I think the easy answer is my calling is to help people.
Right.
That doesn't float with me either.
Why not?
What is okay? Here's a newsflash. Everyone's calling is to help people. That's the ticket to get in the door. Okay? You've got to step through the door and see what that specific calling is for you. And when we come back from break, we're going to start digging into another aspect of this calling. Is, does it have to be vocational? You're listening to The Great People Show. We are back on The Great People Show here in Richmond, Virginia on 97.7 FM, 820 AM, The Answer. And, of course, all of our shows are reviewable on Apple Podcasts. Today we're talking about calling. What is your calling? What are you called to do? What in the heck is a calling? And we started by the top of the hour talking about most people really have no idea what their calling is.
Yeah.
They really don't. And right before we went to break, we talked about, I brought up the word vocation. Mm-hmm. Most people associate the word calling with work. Right. I'm called to do this.
Right.
Which makes sense. Then there's also the whole, maybe I'm not called to work here. Perhaps I'm called to do something in addition to my job through nonprofit work, service, things of that nature.
Yeah.
So here's the next question. Does a calling have to do with your work?
Mine, in my case, I don't think that mine does. Mine is around something that I generally volunteer my time for.
Okay. Ooh, now, I'm surprised to hear you say that. You're talking about the fire.
Yeah.
EMS. So
Yeah.
I would have figured that would have been your calling.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, that's right. Because, okay, so your work is not necessarily, you're paid full time where you spend most of the time during the day isn't necessarily your calling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, in fact, I think for many people, what they get paid for during the day is a means for them to be able to serve what their calling is, because they can't get paid for what their calling is.
Why can't they? Why can't you, our listeners, get paid for your calling? I challenge anyone listening to the show right now, if you feel like you're in a dead-end job, that you're not involved in your calling, you feel stuck, I challenge you to really think hard about that, because I think we can go and work in our calling.
I mean, you can, JJ, but I don't think that that's always the answer for everybody. I mean, I have a paying career that I'm very good at, that I enjoy. I would not by any means say that it is my calling, but I'm really good at what I do. I think you are too. Now, maybe for you it is your calling, but I have a career with tremendous flexibility where I get to help people, which I enjoy, and the flexibility enables me to be able to spend a lot of time doing things that I feel more called to do.
What if your job was actually keeping you from engaging more in your calling?
Well, it is. Mine is.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now. But if I were to take my calling, let's use the fire department. If I were to take my calling and turn that into a full-time paying job, which I could do, if I were to do that, then I would, of course, quit my job.
Yep.
My wife, who stays at home and raises our awesome children, would have to go back to work.
Yep.
We would have to sell our house and move into a smaller house. We'd take less vacations.
Yep.
So all of a sudden, I would be serving my calling. It would be the most selfish thing in the world that I could do, because it would impact my entire family just for my own selfish purposes.
Okay. We just, on our Facebook Live feed, which if you're listening to the show live, facebook.com/greatpeopleshow, you can look into our studio. Amy Markwood said, I feel called to love other people's children, and now I am a foster and adoptive parent. That is a calling that really has probably absolutely nothing to do with her vocation.
Yeah.
In fact, her vocation is necessary to fund her abilities to be a responsible foster parent.
And what a great calling that is, and not an easy one.
Oh my God. I've never been a foster parent. I've talked to a few in my life, and I just admire you all. If you're fostering a child, I'm a parent, and it's hard enough.
Yeah. I've got some friends that are foster parents, and you have to be called to do that. I feel like.
Well, that's okay. So I'm going to jump down into my notes, because this was an important part of this topic. How do you know you're being called? Is it always going to be based on positive experiences? Do you have to enjoy it? Is there happiness involved in it? Because I'm watching Amy's comment and thinking there is joy and love and happiness around being a foster parent, but there's a whole lot of other negative feelings. I think people get really stuck in that if I'm not happy all the time in what I do, then I'm not in my calling.
I like to use the word fulfillment when it comes to a calling. It may not make you happy all the time, but ultimately, I think your calling is going to be fulfilling to you. Mm-hmm. And what do you think about that?
There has to be a net effect.
Yeah.
I think there has to be a net
positive effect.
Yeah. I mean, look what Mother Teresa went through, right? I mean, her calling was to give peace to the dying poor that had nobody, right? You can't imagine that's a positive work environment.
No, not at all.
But in her mind and in her heart, I almost would guarantee it was joy. Mm-hmm. The whole time was joy, because she was bringing love to those people.
She was. Or look at Gandhi. I mean, you can look at all sorts of figures through history who sacrificed tremendously, but they had a calling. They saw it through, and in the end, it was, and for the most part, it was fulfilling to them.
Teresa on Facebook, McRoberts brings up an excellent question. Why do we think vocation is not a synonym for calling? In fact, I kind of question, if you aren't working in your calling somewhere, how do you make progress with it? How do you execute on it? How do you manifest it in this world?
That's a great question, and Teresa, I know Teresa, as I know you do, and she's an example of someone who did have a calling and left a vocation in order to serve the vocation that she
was
felt
an
like,
attorney, right?
Yes. was her calling in life.
Teresa, you should call the show right now. I know you're watching us on Facebook. No pressure. Yes, there is. 804-454-1366. In fact, in just a few minutes, we're going to be opening up our phone lines to everyone. That's 804-454-1366. We're going to be going to break here in about 7 minutes or so. So I want to try to tackle this next part of it before we go.
Okay.
And we may not be able to tackle it all. Is why we don't see the vocation, why we don't see the calling.
Yeah.
Why we cannot see it. I believe that we are 100% being called all the time. That is a signal that is going to us 24/7, 365. I do not believe that we are just sitting in this barren desert and then all of a sudden, boom, it shows up. I think there is a calling hitting us 100% of the time. It's constant. If you don't know what it is or you're unsure, it's because you're not listening. And why aren't we listening? Well, I can give you a big reason. We're constantly distracted.
Yep.
We're constantly distracted. If you are working your fingers to the bone just to pay your bills, buy a nice car, get a better house, there is a good chance that you're missing your calling because you're not listening to the right things. You're not listening to the right voices in your head. There's a calling that comes from the heart. There's a calling that comes through your head. And just as important, well, maybe not just as important, but really important, is the calling that comes from the people around us.
Yeah.
The people around us are going to speak to us on what our calling is.
So I want to challenge you with a question here. Mm-hmm. We started the show with you talking about how the number one answer for all this stuff is if you're a parent, to raise my children.
Yeah, the purpose.
The purpose. So what about women and men as well that are stay-at-home dads who stay home with their kids? You and I both are married to wonderful women who stay home with their children. Mm-hmm. I can tell you that if my wife was in the studio right now, she would tell you that her calling is absolutely to be a mother, and that is all that she has ever ultimately wanted in her life as her calling. I don't know about your wife.
Sure. I do not know if Sam would agree. We've constantly had this conversation. I think when you have every once in a while have this conversation. I think when you have children, that is a calling to make sure that they are brought up to be loving, God-fearing adults, and it's our job to make that happen. Mm-hmm. I'm worried about people that, as we mentioned at the top of the show, that when their kids get of age and they leave the nest, they feel like they're left with lack of calling.
Well, can your calling change, JJ, through different stages in your life?
I would hope so.
I would certainly think so.
I that is above my pay grade. Mm-hmm. So I can't sit here with all honesty to know that I've been through the training class on callings that's told me that is the case. I suspect it does change. Or here's another one to throw on for size. What if the ultimate calling is in the last quarter of our life, and the entire first 3 quarters are designed to prepare us for the last quarter?
Well, I think that'd be pretty great.
And you can accomplish quite a bit in those first 3 quarters along the way.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's where a lot of people do get stuck. They don't feel like that they're in it in the moment, right? Yeah. I'm 29 years old. I'm making decent money. I've got what I need. I'm accomplishing my goals, but there's just more out there.
Yep.
Well, how do you know that this is not part of that calling, that this is a trial period? This is a grooming period. This is a growing period. Going back to the whole, I feel like I'm in a dead-end job. I'm making decent money, but I don't like what I do.
Right.
Well, maybe you're not supposed to like what you're doing right now. Maybe you're supposed to feel some negative angst towards that.
Yeah, and maybe I don't have any better prospects at the moment.
Uh-huh. Or you need to wait.
Right.
There's growth that needs to happen there. There's things to learn. There's experiences to have. I don't remember when we talked about this on the show, but there was a moment or many moments in our shows where we've talked about you have to go through adversity in order to grow into your calling.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, how do we have the strength and the courage and the enthusiasm and the confidence to fully execute on our calling if we're not done growing yet?
Oh, I agree. And it's funny, we talk about the fire service is what I would, and I know we talk about that a lot on the show, but it is, I think, my calling. I found it, don't forget, through Rotary Club, which I was in with you. I joined that club because I was trying to find something more. I wanted to find how I could give and what would maybe find a calling, find something that fulfilled me. And it ultimately led me to that.
Yeah. So what are you listening to? Who are you listening to? If you are at any point in your life, teenager, 20s, 30s, 40s, we're going to open up our phone lines here in the Great People Studio, taking callers when we come back from break. 804-454-1366. That's 804-454-1366. You can also catch our show on Facebook Live right now if you're listening to us on the radio at facebook.com/Great People Show. And all of our shows are archived on Apple, iTunes, podcasts. I screw that up, I think, every time I say it. I guess iTunes is the way to say it. No podcast.
No, it's iTunes, but it's the iTunes podcast.
It's the podcast iTunes.
Yeah. So
it's the Apple Tunes.
Right. If you do a search for us on your podcast app on iTunes, you can find it. And, it's great. I was listening to some older shows in the car on a long car trip I had the other day.
Really?
I was.
Were you on them yet?
I was listening to some before I was here and some after.
Yeah.
And I determined that I've seriously taken the show straight down.
Oh, come on. Well, that is
good.
a symptom of a great person being way too humble for themselves. Right? Way too humble.
But it's good to listen, because the thing about the shows that we try to do is we try to do shows that are applicable at any time. They may be topical sometimes to current events, but they're always there. So if you're a new listener, I would absolutely encourage you, go check it out on iTunes, check it out on Facebook, because you can find all of our old shows right there and take a listen.
Yeah, and when we come back, we're going to keep talking about this whole, what is your calling? What are you listening to? How do you know that you're fulfilling your mission on earth? Because it kind of comes and goes in a blink of an eye. To join the show, 804-454-1366. You're listening to The Great People Show. All right, we're back here on The Great People Show. I'm the host, JJ, and in the studio with me is JM.
That's right.
James Muncie. We have been talking about calling all morning, just waiting for the calling.
We are.
Waiting for the phones to ring, because God's going to call, someone's going to call any minute and tell us what we're supposed to do for the rest of the day. It's coming.
It's coming.
The tidal wave of calling is coming. A little bit of controversy here this morning, I think. Kind of where does calling show up? Does it have to show up? Does it have to come from God? Does it have to be in your work? Does it have to be involving other people? Or can the calling just be all about you?
Does everybody have a calling?
I think they do.
Okay.
I can't imagine. I just absolutely cannot imagine being in this world all this time and not have a calling for it. I just can't imagine it. I really can't.
So it's a shame there are no statistics for this, because then my next question would be, what percentage of people actually serve their calling?
Well, how do you know? How would people know?
Oh, you would.
I mean, you can do an exit interview at death. Was that tasteless?
It was. It really was.
a
tasteless and morbid.
Was that
I'm
a tasteless
offended.
comment? I mean, well, welcome to the world we live in today. I mean, seriously, I've never seen any research on this.
No,
I
mean,
we
you
should be
couldn't really
asking
do.
some 80-year-old and 90-year-old folks.
We should. I mean, you couldn't really. I don't think you could really do the research. I can tell you that I know. I have met a lot of people who have served in the military, in military conflicts, who have certainly, I think, would tell you that their calling was to do that. And I think afterwards, a lot of their call. This goes back to, you can have more than one calling, I think, JJ, and I think it can change through different phases of your life.
Connie Bruce on Facebook Live just asked us if calling is different than purpose. I said at the top of the show, I think there's a huge difference. Well, I said at the top of the show there's a difference, and I think I may have just exaggerated. I don't think there's a huge difference. I where it's different for me is how people, maybe it is the same, but the way that people internalize it and process it and think about it, I think is different. Simply because you can ask anybody different question, or you can ask anybody the same question and you're going to get different answers. what's your purpose, what is your calling, and you're going to get different answers.
So, JJ, what is your purpose and what is your calling?
My purpose is to challenge people so that they become their greatest self.
Okay.
Oh, well, see, I'm a little clouded on this because I think about this stuff all the time, James.
I know you do.
Because if I were most people, I would probably say my purpose is my children. I mean, I'm trying to be real about it. I think I've studied this way more than the average person has, and have thought about it and put it into writing and study it, meaning like I study what I'm supposed to be doing with things. I spend a vast majority of my entire day truly helping other people, either through the Dale Carnegie work that I do, the Great People Show work that I do, having children, investing my time into Little League sports.
Mm-hmm.
This time of the year, it's football. I'm pretty clear with myself that my purpose and my calling is not about me, simply because of what I do,
okay,
of how I've done it. I'm crystal clear on this. And if something were to happen to me and I were to die today, I could honestly say I fulfilled my purpose and I responded to my calling.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's another word that we should be using here. Are you responding to your calling?
Okay. So can your calling then become your purpose?
Ooh, I know we're not supposed to have dead air on the radio, but I've got to think about that.
Yeah.
Ask that question again.
Can your calling become your purpose? I certainly think that it can.
Can your calling become your purpose? I don't know. I internally, at the end of the day, at the end of the journey, I think it is all the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think we are born on a mission,
right?
And whether or not we fulfill that mission or how much of that mission we fulfill is up to us. And what I wanted to accomplish for our listeners today is really just to think super hard about, are you investing your time and your energy into the right things? Mm-hmm. Are you really hearing the people around you and yourself when it comes to your calling? Because most people are not.
Yeah.
They're chasing the wrong things.
But if everybody served their calling as their vocation, JJ, I think our society would fall apart.
Really?
Yeah.
In what way?
Well, let's take all the wonderful people out there who work in our factories. I mean, who you could go on and on. I mean, think about all the vocations and jobs there are out in the world that are probably not necessarily somebody's calling, but that they earn a good living at, that they can support their family, which maybe they would say their family is their calling. But if those people weren't out there, we'd be in big trouble.
Yeah. I think you can find purpose and calling in any vocation. I think you can. Working in a factory, anything. Just think of some of those dirtiest jobs, whatever those the TV show does, that they're doing things for us as a society that we would never do ourselves, and they're oftentimes not looked highly upon. But I tell you what, they keep the systems going. And I wonder how many of those folks, I'd love to hear from a listener sometime, of folks that feel like that the outside world looks at their job as almost like a necessary evil, like whether like garbage collection, cleaning, whatever it is, cleaning people's office spaces in the middle of the night, whatever that hard work is that you do. I think you can find absolute purpose and calling in that, mainly because from my point of view, you're working with other people, especially if you're a manager of these other people. You have such a huge impact on the world, and I'm not going to change my point of view that we had at the top of the show, that if your calling doesn't involve other people, it's not really a calling. It might be on the path to a calling because it's something that's developing you, but your calling has to involve other people.
Yeah, and it may involve other people indirectly. I mean, there are lots of people out there who just can't stand to be around other human beings.
I think people are called to help those people.
Yeah, but I have a friend who really is just one of these people who can't stand most other human beings, doesn't generally want to be around people. And I saw him the other weekend, and he was driving a tractor pulling hay rides for a local pumpkin patch. Okay. And I actually teased him. I said, "Boy, this is the perfect job for you because you don't have to interact with anybody. All you do is drive the tractor back and forth." But he's still helping people.
Yeah. Yeah. So you don't actually have to come in contact with people to help other people.
Exactly.
Right. Angie Wright on Facebook Live here said, my calling has always been to motivate and inspire people to be the better you. And Angie's called into the show before, and I know she lives that.
Yeah.
Which brings me to another question is, are you certain that your calling means, or does your calling have to be your 100% focus every single day?
Absolutely not.
Do you have to be fully engaged in your calling all the time?
No. I think when you can be, that's awesome. But I think that for most people, that's just not realistic.
And that sounds exhausting too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really does. I mean, what if we had to spend all of our time doing our most emotionally intensive work?
That'd be tough.
I'm reading a book right now called Rest. It's a great book. And the premise of the book is if you don't rest for you, you're just hurting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That your brain is designed to stop and recharge and re-energize. And I think for me personally, I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm involved in callings that require energy beyond my physical limitations.
Oh, I am too.
I have days where I'm done with my calling energy wise. I feel like I can't give anymore. It's difficult for me to give more.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think there are days, whether it's doing your calling or not, there are just days that again, I have a job that is it's means to an end for me to serve my calling. I was in my office till 9:30 last night. I had a 14-hour day yesterday.
Well, thanks for coming here and being part of this calling.
Well, of course, because this is much. But again, because I was at work until 9:30 last night, it enables me to be here.
In charge, Betty.
That's
in
it.
charge. So when we come back from our next break, we're going to keep talking about this whole calling thing. The great people phone lines are open. 804-454-1366. It's a good day in the Great People studio.
So
because we're called, brother.
We are. So I got a question for you. Should I be intentional about seeking out my calling, or is it something that I should? I mean, the word calling in and of itself implies that it is going to come to you.
Okay. Well, if you look at the actual premise of calling, and I mentioned this earlier in the show, it's always coming to us.
Right.
There are signals always coming into our life. Always. Whether it be through other people, circumstances that we find ourselves in. I think your specific question was, should we be seeking it out?
Yeah.
Your calling is already seeking you out.
But what if I don't see it? What if I don't hear it?
I think that's why we're here on the Great People Show. It's unfortunate. It's sad. It's disappointing when we live our lives year after year after year and we kind of wonder, what am I here for?
Mm-hmm.
What am I supposed to be doing with my time? Why does my job not fulfill me? Why am I not happy? Why am I in a dead-end relationship? I think all of these things get in the way of us seeing what our calling is. No, and I'm not even talking about doing anything about the calling. I'm talking about just noticing it and seeing it. I mean, that lost feeling. I've been that way.
Mm-hmm. I think we've all been there.
We've all been there. It wasn't until I got into Dale Carnegie in the year 2000. And even then, I didn't realize it was a calling.
Mm-hmm.
It took me several years to realize that being in this business that I'm in was actually part of why I was put on this earth. And I went into it for the wrong reasons. I went into it to make money.
Right.
Because I had done just about everything in my life that way.
Well, I think that just goes to show that sometimes we can go into something with different motivations than we come out of them with.
Yeah.
You never know where you might find it.
Yeah.
So is it meant to be? Was it fate?
Yep. Well, it's part of that. It's part of the journey.
Yeah.
It's part of the journey. Every failure you've had is part of that journey. I can't express this enough. The question is, what are you listening to? Who are you listening to? And to be part of this conversation, 804-454-1366, 804-454-1366. One thing that I did notice in our Facebook, and I keep saying Facebook because that's where most people engage us, but it's all over social media, Twitter, anywhere. A lot of very general callings. I mentioned one earlier. my calling is to help people.
Right.
My calling is to be a lawyer. My calling is to be a parent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a good start. That's a really good start. But to do what?
Yeah.
To do what? I mean, if your calling is to help people, to do what? You can find helpfulness in anything you do. You can find it anywhere. And the one thing that maybe we should pound into this topic a little bit more is that your calling should be an expression of your heart towards others. If your heart is not involved in your calling,
Mm-hmm.
is it really a calling? We presented this I call it a diagram. It's weird to use that word on the radio. Of a bullseye with two rings and a bullseye. That outer ring is I know. The next ring is I do, and that inside bullseye is I am.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the answers that I saw for their calling was all about the I do thing.
Right.
Which ties back into the vocation.
Right.
Because the calling is tied back into work for most people. Why can't we see our calling as something as who we are?
I think we can. I think we should.
Yeah. So if you feel your calling is to help people, what are you needing to do today to develop yourself towards your calling?
Right.
Here's another question for you. Are we always ready, prepared, and forged for our calling today? Because a lot of people say, well, when I do this, then I'll be able to do that. When I get this, then I'll be able to do that. We end up waiting for other things to happen before we can, well, as soon as I can get that job, then I'll be able to go and fulfill my calling or fulfill my purpose. Or they feel like that it's 2 or 3 steps ahead. So they wait and they wait and they wait. I talked to someone the other day that has been in the car business selling cars for 3 years. She knows she should have left 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What are you waiting on? Why are you hanging out? It's because we're used to it being a certain way in our life. We're comfortable. The status quo is probably keeping you from fulfilling your calling.
Yeah, probably so. I think that a lot of people would tell you though that it's that at some point you've got adult responsibility that comes into the whole thing, and you still have to be responsible to your obligations. And sometimes being responsible to your obligations in life conflict with what your calling is.
Yeah, yeah. We talked about that on several shows, the distractions in our life. In this distracted world, the signs and evidence you're calling are probably right in front of you,
Mm-hmm.
but you're just not paying attention to the right things. It's not a screaming, it's not a shouting, it's a calling. It's going to be a subtle signal multiple times over the course of your life that's going to keep telling you this is what you're supposed to be doing. This is what you're supposed to be doing. And I'm curious, James, since being in the fire department is a calling of yours, when did you start noticing those signals?
You know, it's funny. I noticed those signals. I was at a meeting at a firehouse
Mm-hmm.
for something we were doing with Rotary.
Okay.
And they got a call for a very serious accident on I-64 here in the Richmond area.
Mm.
And one of the battalion chiefs that was at this meeting said, James, you should get on the fire engine and ride along. I'm dead serious. And
Wow.
and so I did.
Yeah.
And we got out to this accident, and it was a Prius that was going down I-64 and backed into the back of a VDOT truck that was doing some work on one of the lanes. And there was really heavy damage to this car. And I got there, and there were 2 adults in the front, and they were both there was a lot of blood. They were pretty seriously messed up.
Yeah.
And there was a child in the back, and the child was in a car seat, and she was about a 2 or 3 year old little girl, and she seemed to be okay. And I remember one of the firefighters picked up this girl, and they had all these other things to deal with, and she's crying, and she's upset, and he's looking around, and he sees me. And he raises up this little girl, and I walk over, and I grab
Wow.
this 3-year-old that had just been in this car accident, sees her parents really banged up, and I was done. This is it for me. I mean, it hit me like a bolt of lightning.
What was it, though? What hit you?
I couldn't even. It's hard to even put into words.
It was a matter of the heart.
Yes, I got back and
It was emotional.
Yeah. And we got back to the firehouse after this was all said and done, and I turned to my friend and I said, how do I get into this?
You wanted more.
Yes.
You got a taste of something
Yes.
in your heart, and you just wanted more of that.
I did.
Wow, that's a good indicator of whether you're in your calling or not. Are you experiencing a mountaintop? Do you have a mountaintop experience? It doesn't happen often. Sometimes it happens once,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not designed to happen a long time. That's where a lot of people get confused. People feel like that they're always chasing the mountaintop experience, and they're always trying to get there. And then once they do finally think they're there, they just want to stay planted.
Yeah.
And we get really upset whenever we have to come back down. And that mountaintop experience is usually something incredibly emotional, overwhelming. Sometimes it can bring you to tears. Yet we ignore that too.
Definitely. All the time people ignore it.
Even when here's another question. Do we just find ourselves on top of the mountain, experiencing these amazing things, and you simply say, wow, that was awesome, but I need to get back to the rest of my life? I mean, what
Sure.
if that situation, you said, that was cool, I hope to do it again one day, but I've got things to go do?
And I could have easily done that. And I'll tell you what, when we got back, and I asked, I was like, how do I sign up? Well, the answer was, well, you've got to take about 600 hours worth of classes, which take place 2 nights a week over 8 months from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., and then every other Saturday from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m.
That's a downer.
And you've got to do this for 8 months. And no, when you get out of that, there's about another 100 hours that you're going to need over the following year. A lot of people, and even myself for a minute, a lot of people would say that and say, well, it was fun, but I can't do that. There are a million reasons why I shouldn't have done that. My job, my family, the other obligations. I had to give things up, and I sacrificed time with my family to pursue all those classes. And so a lot of people would have walked away right there, I think. I chose not to, and I'm better for it. But it would have been the wrong decision, JJ, for me to say, you know what, I've got all these other obligations. I've got 2 kids and a wife, and I just don't have time to give 600 hours over an 8-month period.
I don't know. You tell me. Would it have been wrong?
I would never know the difference.
Oh, that's another good point. I don't know. I think you would. I think if you, and how long ago did that happen?
I guess that was almost 5 years ago.
Okay, so 5 years later, let's assume that everything else in your life would remain constant as it is right now,
Yep.
minus being involved in the fire department.
Right.
You would know the difference. You would know that being in the fire department would have made the difference. I would bet that you'd be a fairly content, dare I say, maybe a little unhappy guy if that did not happen to you. Mainly because everything in your life is normal and good.
Yeah.
Just normal.
We have to see the doors that open in front of us, and we have to be brave enough to step in. I'll give you another example, a much more recent one. Back this past summer, I knew that I saw that Kelsey was going to be, who was co-hosting the show with you, was going to be leaving to go back to school. You and I used to talk all the time. We, for the last couple of years, we've kind of just gone in separate directions with our careers. Mm-hmm. And I reached, and I saw maybe this door's open a little bit. I saw the show. I really would have loved to have been part of the show, and I reached out to you.
Yeah.
I could have just easily never have texted you.
Most people wouldn't. Most people didn't. Most people haven't.
But I like to think of myself, because it's generally led me into good directions. Mm-hmm. I like to think of myself as someone who's always looking for where that cracked door is, and who's not scared to step through. And I would encourage our listeners out there, when you see that, even if it's going to take you a little out of your comfort zone, don't be scared of peeking through that door, because there could be a calling back there.
I've got a 3-step process that I just built based on this conversation we've had. Step number 1, examine things carefully. Examination. Put your bunny ears on. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. We just had a bunny conversation yesterday with someone. Put your listening ears on. If they're bunny ears, that's fine too. Mm-hmm. Put your listening ears on. I found this scripture. It's a good one. 1 Thessalonians 5:21. Examine everything carefully. Hold fast to that which is good. Okay? As soon as you find what's good, guess what? You're probably going to find a lot of barriers in the way. I believe it's designed that way. I think our calling is designed to be good in what may look like as being unreachable, because there's going to be barriers thrown in our way of our calling.
Mm-hmm.
In your situation, that barrier was a tremendous amount of work, classes, studying, and whatnot that most people already have ran away from. So that's step number 2. What barriers in the way? And then look for the open doors around the barriers. To me, that's called being relentless. To me, that's called being resourceful. Most people, maybe we need to change our vernacular here. It's not that most people don't know what their calling is. Most people are afraid of their calling. Most people are scared to actually have to run through the forest to get to the other side. So that's my challenge to our callers today.
I like
Not
that.
our callers, our listeners.
Yeah.
That are being called.
That's right.
To fulfill your purpose. We've had a great time on the show today. You can reach us anytime at jj@greatpeopleshow.com. Of course, all of our shows are on Apple Podcasts. We broadcast here weekly, Thursdays from 9 to 10 on 97.7 FM, 820 The Answer. Go to our website, greatpeopleshow.com. You see a lot of stuff out there because we are your guides to greatness. We are your on-call coach. Thank you for having us here this morning. James, parting words for us.
Parting words, we get a lot of people listen to this show on the podcast or on Facebook after we've aired it, aren't listening to it live on the radio. If you have a thought on today's show, send us that message. We get a lot of messages on Facebook through the week. Send us that message because it helps us in future weeks. We'll answer. So don't think if you're not listening to this live that you can't reach out to us. And again, my message from today, guys, when you see that door open, again, just like we were just saying, walk through it a little bit. You can always turn around. Take a look.
And if the door's not open, knock on it. And
That's right.
keep knocking on it and keep knocking on it until somebody answers. Because the people that are surrounding you right now have the answers that you're looking for.
That's right. Well, I look forward to seeing what we talk about next week, Thursday, 9 a.m.
See you next week,
right
folks.
here.
Great People Show. Later.